There we go. Alrighty, welcome everybody. Super thrilled to have everyone joining us. For those that don't know me, I'm Mike Molyneux. I'm co-founder of Thena. I am joined by Sid, who is our founding CSM at Thena as well. And we are super excited to do this webinar with Shayan, who's Senior Manager of Customer Support at Mixpanel. And we're going to be talking about a lot of different things today, but largely around unleashing Slack's potential with Zendesk. So a combination of Slack and Zendesk and how Thena fits in as well. We'll mix in that a little bit. But lots of really interesting topics to cover today. Would love to start, Shayan, with just an intro from you. Tell us who you are and kind of what your role is, how long you've been at Mixpanel, and then we can dive into some of the specifics.
Yeah, of course. Well, I want to say first, thanks to Mike and Sid for having me. I've been at Mixpanel for 6 years in 4 days, actually. I'm hitting my 6-year anniversary. I started at Mixpanel as a support engineer, level 1, trying to kind of break into the tech space. I was really fascinated by SaaS in particular. And from there, I actually fell in love with support. I think the interactions that you have with people very much so define their experience with the software. We're the first line of kind of support and information that customers reach out to on a daily basis. And that's kind of where my passion for support came. And it was my first role working in the support field. And I really fell in love with it from there. That kind of led to me moving up through the ranks a little bit. And currently, I'm the senior manager for the support engineering team at Mixpanel. I manage the North America team. It's a team size of around 16, 17 people. We're currently hiring if people are interested, both in SF and London and Barcelona. But yeah, that's kind of where I am now. And I've been really excited to recently start using Thena.
Awesome. And you're hiring for support engineers?
Correct. Level 1 support engineers across all 3 cities, London, Barcelona, and remote US.
Very nice. And pretty much everyone knows Mixpanel. So if there's anything that you want to touch on throughout about how Mixpanel operates and any other plugs you want to plug in for Mixpanel, feel free to along the way. But we'd love to start with just your customer stack. So your customer communication stack, you've been there for years. You've set up some really amazing things. Let's talk a little bit about how you support customers, how many customers you're supporting, and what are the tools day to day that you tend to rely on?
Yeah. So right now, the volume of support tickets that we field, tickets including chat, email, calls, kind of like all methods of communication, is just above 2,000 a month. So that's increased pretty significantly. When I started at Mixpanel, it was 1,000 a month, or just over 1,000, like 1,200-ish. So we've almost doubled in support volume since then. From there, the way that we support those customers is, well, I'll give you the pre-Thena and the post-Thena breakdown. From there, the way we supported customers was using primarily email support. So customers would write in, we have a web form in our UI, you click the question mark icon, you can create a ticket, it creates an email correspondence, we reach out to you via email. We also supported live chat within the product between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Pacific time. That was a really popular avenue. We see a lot of volume through our live chat. And then we also offer calls to customers who purchase support packages, as well as customers who are in situations that would be easier resolved via a call versus an email. So there's a lot of situations where even though a customer doesn't have a package, it makes sense just to get on a call with them and solve their problem in 15 minutes rather than having 10 emails sent back and forth over the span of a week. But yeah, recently, the newest addition to our kind of channels that we support is Slack. That's kind of the new frontier, so to speak. And the tools that we use to kind of work with customers, I want to bear in mind my team really prefers a simplistic approach. They want less. We've had a lot of tools in the past, and people always say, hey, I don't want to have 8 tabs open with 8 different pieces of software to do my job. So keeping that in mind, we've we've switched to a very simplistic view. We use Zendesk for customer correspondences. We use Notion for internal knowledge-based things and planning. We use Jira for keeping track of bugs and Slack for communicating. And Athena is the newest addition to our stack. It's the newest tab that I like to say that support engineers have open, because support engineers on the team always talk about how they want to reduce the amount of windows they have open. So Athena is that newest window that's joined.
It's a really interesting approach to kind of have that simplistic approach. I feel like over the last decade, as SaaS has really exploded, there have been a lot of companies that have started to come in, and you can add a lot of little point solutions along the way. But at the end of the day, it's really there's a few main things that you get the most value out of. It's nice to hear that Athena's one of those in that top 5 for you. Talk a little bit about how these systems speak to each other, because you mentioned kind of having 2,000. You said about 2,000 tickets.
Yeah.
Essentially support requests a month. And you guys have thousands of customers, right?
Yeah.
So your volume and the places that they can come from is really complex and really advanced. Maybe we can just touch briefly on how those systems talk to each other at a high level, and then probably we'll want to circle back on some nuances or specifics a little bit later.
Yeah, so Zendesk is the central hub. That's where the support engineers live and breathe. That's where all the communication essentially happens. So the whole mission here is to get as much information into Zendesk so we can kind of create workflows and operationalize it there. I'm sorry. And then from there, kind of let support engineers respond to the tickets. So one source of information is Salesforce. That's where ARR, support packages, plan information, all that good stuff lives. So we sync that to Zendesk using Census. We also have our own data store of customer information that is stored in our BigQuery instance. And we also use Census to get that into Zendesk. So things that you'll see pulling from these two areas are ARR, account team. So who's the AM account manager, who's the customer success manager on the team. And then from our own database, we pull the plan, the packages they might have, because we offer a few add-on packages that customers can add on. And that's kind of how we're using Zendesk as well as Salesforce and our own BigQuery table. Now, another source of information is Notion, and the tickets that we view as noteworthy, we send to Notion and we add them in a table, and our product managers review those for product gaps or product deficiencies to kind of operationalize off of that. And then the last one I would say is Jira, which is where our bugs are tracked. And we have a connector that's bi-directional between Zendesk and Jira. So you can link tickets to bugs in Jira, and then when the bugs are updated, it posts an internal note back to Zendesk, letting you know that, hey, there's an update to this bug, let the customer know, essentially.
Wonderful. And then, so you mentioned Slack is kind of one of the newer channels, and we'll touch on the community later, but just within your own instance where you have actual dedicated channels with customers, you have some of those requests coming in they tend to be with the larger customers, right? That you tend to have these Slack channels. Can you tell us a little bit about how you think about having channels with customers, where maybe you draw the line? Because I know there's a lot of people on listening in that are curious, like, how do I structure this? We've kind of fallen into having Slack channels with customers, but what are some of the best practices around when do we offer a channel? If so, do we charge for it? When do we charge for it? I would love for you to speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, so at Mixpanel, the current way the Slack channels are set up is they target our enterprise customers. And even within enterprise, there's a bit of a higher end slice that we're taking out of. And these channels, just for context, have existed for many years at Mixpanel. But what's happened is we had trouble kind of keeping track of them. There was a ton of channels. If you even searched in our own Slack instance, you would find multiple channels potentially for the same company. You would find some that are private, some that are public. It was kind of a war zone because the responsibility to create that channel fell on the CSM And that was kind of an independently made decision by the CSM to create that channel. So what ended up happening is CSM goes to another company, maybe CSM goes to a different segment, becomes a member of a different team. All these things happen. And then if that channel is private, it's gone forever. Or if that channel has an unintuitive name, that's one of the issues I've actually found myself wrangling with a lot recently, is some channels have acronyms in their names that I'm not quite sure what they have to do with the customer's name. But if these channels are not intuitively named, they're just impossible to find and keep track of. So that was like a big problem that like we faced. Not to mention, you have Bob Smith in some channel asking a question, and the CSM or the account manager sees the question. They don't know how to then turn that question into something that they can answer because it might be out of their depth. So then do they tag in a support engineer and add a support engineer to this one-off channel that the support engineer will most likely forget to look at? I think is the realistic point of view of the situation. But those were some of the ways that we kind of use Slack and some of the early days problems that we saw with having these Slack channels. But yeah, we create the Slack channel with the customer. We add as many people as the customer wants from their side. And then we add, originally, the way we would add it is we would add the account manager, a CSM, and a solutions architect, which was more of a technical project work role on our side. And those three people would be the ones to kind of interact with the customer in that Slack channel for most of the issues that were being raised.
Cool. Yeah, and you touched on something briefly that I think a lot of companies that are growing kind of face as well, which is in the beginning or at a smaller volume, they might have a support engineer that might pop into the channels, might get tagged into the channels. That causes complexity around that support engineer needs to now check a different system and go into that Slack channel with the customer. But then B, I think sometimes it's common where then customers get used to just tagging that support engineer, which isn't what you want at the end of the day, right? You want them to go through some sort of consistent flow or consistent funnel, maybe have the CSM or the account manager triage, and in some cases, getting those support engineers out of that specific channel and then swarming elsewhere, whether it be an internal channel or Zendesk in your case. So you touched on some of the challenges as you fast forward to today. What's the current setup? How do you think about like a customer request coming in, especially for these top enterprise accounts? Customer request comes in through Slack. What's the flow look like? And then what are the benefits you feel from that flow as you guys have optimized it over time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just taking a step back, the way that we give our rollout Thena to these accounts currently is in a stage of us trying to exactly figure out what works best for the customer and what works best for us. So we've rolled it out in North America specifically, because that's where a majority of our support engineering team lives. We have a lot of staffing specifically on the West Coast. So that's kind of the clientele we decided to target, West Coast enterprise accounts that are good logos, paying more than 60K. And then from there, we are rolling it out in a staged rollout where we're telling customers, hey, we're not sure exactly what the model is going to look like for this if you don't have a support package. But for now, we're going to give it to you for a year, and then we'll revisit this conversation based on how your usage of the tool has served you, essentially. But yeah, so answering your question, customer will pop into Slack. They'll ask a question about how a report works in Mixpanel, some sort of analytics-based question. And from there, we leave the triaging to the account managers. That's the role that currently is owning relationships at Mixpanel. And the account manager will review the request, and they will either decide that they can answer it themselves, or if they don't feel comfortable answering it themselves, they will click the ticket emoji, or they'll click on the ... create a support ticket. And from there, a support ticket is created. We ping in two places for the support team. And we actually have narrowed the scope down to just 4 members of the North America team that we call the priority team, because we want to ensure that we give 4 people a lot of familiarity with the tool and we understand how that operates before we kind of expand the scope to the greater team. But where we ping is we ping in a channel called Slack support. And we also have a view in Zendesk that priority team can see called Slack tickets. And ideally, the goal is that queue should always have 0 tickets in it because they should be grabbed right away. And From there, support engineers will assign the ticket to themselves in Zendesk, and they're kind of faced with a choose your own adventure scenario because at Mixpanel, specifically on the support team, we always allow support engineers to operate in a way that makes sense to them, is efficient for them. We don't do round robin ticket assigning, which I think is very common for a lot of support teams. We allow support engineers to choose the tickets that they want to take because perhaps they want to learn more about a specific technology, so they can take tickets around that technology, increase their own skills, etc. So support engineer will assign the ticket to themselves. One thing that Thina does really well here is that within the ticket in Zendesk, they link to the Slack thread. So the support engineer can click on the link to the Slack thread. They'll open up Slack. They'll be able to read all the context. And then from there, this is where the decision falls onto them. Half the people on the priority team like to actually join the Slack channel and respond within Slack because they feel like that's a workflow that's very organic for them. They use Slack so much throughout the day to talk to their peers, to talk to me, etc. So they'll join and they'll actually just communicate via Slack. And the other two members of the team prefer to keep everything within Zendesk, so they never really have to leave home, so to speak. So they'll reply within Zendesk. And the beauty of it is it doesn't matter where they reply from. At the end of the day, it all looks the same on both platforms. And that's the real value that we're finding, which is I can go into Zendesk, search an account, see all the tickets they've created, email, Slack, chat, doesn't matter. And I can see all the context and read all of it. And so can the account team to understand what issues that account's currently facing.
I love that. And somebody asked a question around when a request comes in from a customer in Slack, but maybe doesn't get created as a Zendesk ticket. Where does that get tracked? How does that get tracked? And how does that get handled?
So the methodology that we have, and this is more on the CS side rather than the support side, but the methodology that we have is that we have channels in Slack. We call them account team channels. So it's hashtag AT- and then the account name. That channel is a channel that contains only essentially the CS folks, some sales folks, sometimes a support manager or an executive at the company if there's an executive sponsor involved. Any question that's posted in a customer channel, Thina will route that to the account team channel. And that's kind of like the alerting system or the flagging system for the account manager that they have something they need to respond to. Because otherwise it would be too hard to kind of keep track of, some of our account managers, depending on which sector they're in, they have hundreds of accounts. Even at the low end, they have thousands sometimes. So it's very hard for them to keep track of all their channels. So now we ping in the account team channels, which more than just the account manager lives. You have a CSM usually, you have an executive from our team, a sales manager, etc. So it alerts there. And then there's SLAs as well that are enabled via Thina to kind of remind folks on those teams, hey, X, Y, and Z person asked a question. They haven't been answered in 5 hours. Take a look, essentially. And then from there, that's where they'll kind of grab the task and decide whether they want to respond in Slack themselves or turn it into a ticket.
Cool. Yeah. And I have seen sometimes maybe an AM will take the request, start working on it, and then realize later, oh, this is a bug that we actually want to file as a ticket elsewhere, maybe in Jira. So send it to Zendesk, and then that can kick off the automation to Jira, which is really nice. And then I think one of the other things that we've started talking about too is the connector being able to take all these requests and context and get it into the CRM as well, beyond Zendesk, where maybe it's, if your CRM is Salesforce or HubSpot, being able to get it in there as well. So thank you for that. Okay, so requests come in, creates a ticket, goes into Zendesk, and you have that bi-directional sync back and forth between Zendesk and Slack, enabling, to your point, the customer to work where they want to work, maybe it's Slack in that case, but also your team to work where they want to work. And you touched on the nuance there, which was, hey, 2 of the priority support engineers like to work in Zendesk and just want to reply from there. But 2 of them actually like to be in the channel with the customer and want to reply directly in the thread. And it doesn't matter, right? You're enabling people to work where they want to work, which is really cool. I love it. Let's see. And by the way, just plug too, if anyone in the audience, there's a Q&A section or button on the bottom of the Zoom webinar. So feel free to drop questions in there, and then we can address them as throughout, and I'll include them through the discussion. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. I'd love to talk a little bit about metrics. This is a big one for a lot of folks on being able to track. What do you track? How closely do you track it? There's probably a plug for Mixpanel in here as well. But tell us, you guys are really advanced on your metrics. Tell us a little bit about the metrics that you really prioritize and focus on in the support organization.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing when talking about metrics to kind of call out is trying to visualize metrics within Zendesk is really challenging. Zendesk Analytics is not the most robust. You can get some level of detail, but if you want to kind of dig in and figure out exactly what's going on with your numbers, first response times, being able to do like advanced computations like P90, which is something at Mixpanel we actually care about P90 a lot. I'll dig into that a little bit later. We like to port that data over to Mixpanel. So what we do is we've created webhooks within Zendesk that actually directly hit the Mixpanel track API. And that way in real time, when tickets are created, we use a trigger to say, if a ticket is created, trigger this webhook from that webhook to the Mixpanel API. And then we'll get these ticket created, ticket updated, ticket solved events in Mixpanel. And from there, that allows us to kind of create funnels in Mixpanel to see how long it takes from a ticket being created to it being updated or first touched, and then it being solved. And in those funnels, we can kind of do some analysis on the time in between each step and looking at P90, which is first response P90, which is one of the most important metrics that we care about here at Mixpanel. I think one thing that a lot of companies look at is either average resolution time. But what we've decided to look at is first response time, because within Mixpanel questions, and this is true for a lot of companies, there are so many complex situations that can arise with Mixpanel as a product that it could be totally normal for a ticket to take 2 weeks to resolve. And because of that, I think relying on resolution time is a really swayed metric, in the sense that if you are expecting tickets to be complex and time consuming, why do we want to incentivize people to go fast and potentially cut corners? However, one thing that should never change and should always be fast, in my opinion, is first response time. Because I think about my own experience. For example, I buy something on Amazon, I receive a product, it doesn't match the description, I reach out to support. The thing that I care about is, do they get back to me within 2 days? Because if they haven't got back to me within 2 days, I might forget that I even sent in that request. And I'm probably going to be really frustrated when I do remember I sent in that request and they actually reply. So that's why we focus on first response time. It's something that's completely in each support engineer's hands to respond to customers fast, to follow up to customers fast. We also care about that. We always try to have follow-ups be within 1 business day of the customer replying. So either same day or next day at the worst case. Other things that we care about a lot and that we do a lot of kind of analysis on are the categories. So we have like a very robust like categorization system where support engineers, as they work on tickets, they categorize the ticket. And we use Mixpanel to kind of analyze the top 10 kind of categories that are generating the most tickets, monitor trends within those, and send that data all over to the product and engineering team. It's kind of like a kind of lagging indicator, you could call it, I guess, of maybe a bad deploy or a feature that is generating more questions than answers, which is definitely not what we're looking for here at Mixpanel. And then lastly, Net Promoter Score, or NPS, or CSAT, whatever you might like to call it. That's the third metric that we really care about at Mixpanel and kind of analyze heavily.
I love it. Can we dig in on the first response time a little bit? Because this is an interesting topic for a lot of folks, thinking about how much do we prioritize first response time. And you touched a bit on the philosophy, right? Where it's about, you care passionately, and I've seen this kind of across Mixpanel. You care passionately about that, getting that initial response. Some folks might argue that, hey, that trains the customer that they should expect a quick response. And then if it takes you maybe 8 hours, but they're used to getting a response in 2 hours, that could lead them to be frustrated. What are your thoughts on that? How do you mitigate that? Any tips for people that are thinking about first response time and how to prioritize it?
Yeah, so I'll break it out into my opinions for first response time and follow-up time, because I think the answers are actually very different. So with first response time, actually back from when I first started Mixpanel, we had an experiment on how to increase first response time and what the impact would be. So we tried to essentially reply to tickets with a first touch, telling them that we're investigating their issue. And I'm not talking about an automation, because a lot of companies send an automation, but we send a personalized, like, hi, my name is Shayan. I'm from Mixpanel. I'm on the support team in San Francisco. I'm going to be looking into this. I'll get back to you in a little bit. Essentially sending that to every ticket that came in and seeing how customers reacted to that. And our finding was kind of similar to what you suggested. It creates an unreasonable expectation where they'll like write in like 10 minutes later, any updates on this? And when you're sending out so many first responses to kind of create that experience for everyone, in 10 minutes, you're not going to be able to go back to the first person. You're still sending out first responses to the fifth guy. So that was like one experiment that we did that kind of negatively we saw the impact of. Currently where we stand is we always tell support engineers to try to take the oldest ticket. There's a few exceptions here, downtime related issues, things that sound like bugs, customers who are blocked due to like payment issues. We prioritize those. But for the most case, we always tell people take the oldest ticket, work on them from there. Currently, what that means for Mixpanel is that customers are getting a reply from our support team the next business day. There's been periods of times where this hasn't been the case, and there's been periods of times where this has been kind of blown away. So I think back to January of this year, we were responding to customers within hours. We had our support queue at 0 for like a few weeks in a row, where it was like the first time a ticket would come in, you would see like 8 different eyeballs on the ticket, which is all the support engineers trying to grab it before one another. But then we had a company offsite where we flew out people from Barcelona, people from SF, people who are remote, people from Singapore. We flew out the whole team for a whole week in San Diego. That was in May. And what happened there is our first response time plummeted. It kind of fell off the face of the earth, to be honest. And we were seeing a first response time of 6 days. And what we found was happening was customers were really understanding because they had experienced those fast response times. So when we told them, like, hey, we were at a company offsite, we're really sorry it's taken us 6 days to get back to you. And I always remember a support engineer showing me a ticket recently, actually. And the person was like, hey, don't worry about it. You guys deserve to have fun. I hope you enjoyed San Diego. That will take your time getting back to me. That was like such a like mind-blowing experience. So I think you kind of do foster goodwill by creating response times that are reasonable. Now, I will say like responding within like a few hours creates, yes, an unreasonable expectation, but generally what we're doing is we're responding within the next business day. People are happy, and then they're understanding when we can't meet those goals. That's been in my experience. Now, obviously, there's always going to be some customer who could get kind of upset at the delay because it hasn't met what they were expecting. In those cases, we just tell them the reality of the situation. Like, hey, we have a few people out this week. Sorry about that. Hey, we were at an offsite. We're honest with them. And in most cases, it feels like that honesty is rewarded with compassion. I say most cases, there's always going to be an outlier there. Now, as for follow-up time, I think this one is slightly more problematic because fast follow-ups can oftentimes create this, I want to say, an unhealthy relationship between the customer and the support engineer. Because oftentimes if you're responding via an email like right away, they then respond right away, and then they'll send like another response 5 minutes later, like, hey, did you get my previous email? And another response 10 minutes later, and it creates this kind of slippery slope of like, I know you're at your computer because you just sent me this email right away after I sent my reply in. And the way we combat that is we actually tell the people on the support team to wait a few hours. Never reply to an email that you've just received because it creates this unnecessary expectation. So this is for email, because I think it's very much so different. If you're on chat, that's meant to be real time. They're paying for a real time experience, so you respond in real time. But with email, we always let them wait a little bit. Oftentimes, I've actually found out, even by making someone wait like 4 hours, you'll see them follow up with being like, actually, just kidding. I totally figured out how to do this, because they like go back for 1 second and click around a little bit and be like, well, I figured out how to do this. Or they'll read a doc on their own. That's my favorite. I love it when people go to documentation. It warms my heart. So they'll read a doc on their own and they'll answer the question themselves.
Really interesting. And I want to pivot here in a minute to community and how you guys have set up your community. But before we do that, you talked about email and kind of the expectations and how to think about responsiveness and first response times and follow-up response times there. You mentioned chat. Slack's kind of in the middle, right? Would love to hear your thoughts on how you do this with Slack. And I know it's really geared towards your enterprise customers, but it does have a little bit more of a real-time feeling, which tend to be one of the concerns that people have. But I think there's ways to combat that, to navigate that, to set expectations properly with customers. How do you think about where Slack fits in, how you treat Slack relative to maybe email? And then we'll switch over to community.
Yeah, I'll compare it not just to email, but also to chat. So one sentiment that I've received from the 4 or 5 people who've been using, Slack support as a method of communication have actually been very complimentary about it. They say they prefer it more than chat because it relieves some of the pressure that's been put on them from the real-time element of chat. Whereas the customer is like expecting you to respond in like less than 1 minute to their like chat message. Also, I think, I was telling Mike and Sid about this, but for those of you who've used Zendesk Chat, the default tone for when you receive a message is "uh-oh," which is slightly, for me, who was doing years of live chat back in the day, I get PTSD flashbacks. But with Slack, you respond at your own pace. And you get a message and the customer knows, because they also use Slack day to day. They know that it can take hours to get back to a Slack message. It could even happen the next day. That's normal. So I think that relationship on Slack is, yes, it is expected to be faster than email, but people are understanding when you take time to respond, because they themselves at some point in their careers have definitely taken time to respond to a Slack message, or they've clicked the snooze or the remind me later. So they know the etiquette for Slack. I think one really nice kind of benefit, though, that the support team here at Mixpanel sees is, I think the most frustrating scenarios that we run into on email is when someone writes in with a complex issue, and our first response has to be something along the lines of, hey, can you give me X, Y, and Z so I can dig into this more? Be it a log, a screenshot of something, the console error you're seeing, the error that the command prompt is throwing, etc. And then you're in this mindset of trying to solve this problem, and you send that email away, and then you have to wait 2 days for them to respond, because a lot of people don't check their email religiously. They let things sit, they miss things, etc. But those questions, when asked on Slack, almost always get an immediate response. And that's something actually members of the priority team here at Mixpanel have been talking about, how nice it is, because they're already in the mindset of trying to figure out what's wrong to immediately get the error logs, essentially, and be able to then troubleshoot it right away. So there's some situations where like you're in that mindset to solve this specific problem and you want to keep jamming. And that's like, you can do that on Thena. And then there's other situations where you sent a response, you want to move on to something else, and you can also do that in Thena. It's kind of a best of both worlds, a hybrid of live chat and email.
Yeah, it is. It is pretty interesting that it is kind of like that interesting hybrid, which kind of strikes a nice balance for both the customer, who maybe doesn't necessarily want to pop over to live chat, or like you said, doesn't check email very, very frequently, especially developers, I've found. And also your team, where it's not the pressure of the live chat. You touched on that, but also it's still a little bit more responsive. The customer's more responsive in Slack than they might be on email, so that they can fix the issue at that moment when they're deep in it already. So I love that. I think that's a nice balance. Let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about community, because community is a common topic that I hear with a lot of companies either that already have one or are thinking about doing it. And you guys have done a really nice job. I believe your community just has started in the last couple of years and already has 6,000 members. So let's dive into that. Tell us about about the Mixpanel community, kind of how that fits into the overall mindset of enabling customers to solve their issues.
Yeah, so our community has gone through a lot of iterations. It used to be a forum back in 2018, 2019, and then I think in 2021 or 2022, it pivoted over to a Slack channel, or sorry, a Slack workspace, I should say. And yeah, it's right around 7,000 members actually right now. And it's been somewhere where we allow people to ask questions as well as post suggestions for product ideas and also network. We have like a say hi channel where people can introduce themselves, say where they work, stuff like that, as well as an announcements channel for product changes and events that are going on. Focusing more on the questions channel, the way we use that, and this has gone through many iterations, so I'm just going to give you the current kind of state of things, is we allow anyone to ask questions. We allow anyone to answer questions. The goal of our community was to create a Mixpanel user, like peer-to-peer support system, kind of, for folks to talk about how they use Mixpanel, what issues they run into with their tracking, with building reports, and then have other issues chime in with their thoughts, how they've solved these problems, kind of like a think tank for Mixpanel, and not just for Mixpanel, actually for analytics in general. There's a lot of non-Mixpanel, purely analytics related questions that are in there that have nothing to do with the product. And what we try to do with those questions is we always want to give the customers the first chance to kind of interact with each other. So we wait a little bit and we allow their peers to try to answer these questions before the support engineers step in. Currently, we're waiting around 1 week-ish. And then if we go back and if it hasn't been answered, then a support engineer will jump in and they'll try to answer it and help you out. We also sometimes get tagged on issues because we all have Mixpanel in our name as support engineers, which is, I think, one of the issues that you have to combat with Slack support, be it in community or in the customer channel, is a tagging of support engineers. But oftentimes we'll get tagged in like a thread where two customers have differing answers for the same question, and they'll be like, "Hey, Sean at Mixpanel, can you shed some light on what you think is going on here?" And then I'll be like, X, Y, and Z person's right, or something along those lines.
Any advice you have for people that are getting their Slack community off the ground?
I think what you want to do is at first nurture it. If you kind of just create it and you think it's going to grow organically, it won't. I think that's something that we've witnessed. We tried to do all sorts of incentivizations to kind of get people to join. We shipped swag to people when it was a forum and it first started. And I think I struggle to remember, it was in 2019, but if I recall, I think we spent tens of thousands of dollars on shipping swag to people because there's a lot of international packages that we had to send out. And overall, it increased our like MAU by like 5. So it was like a terrible return on investment. With the Slack channel, it's a little bit easier to manage because I think people are more used to Slack on the Mixpanel side, at least, probably on the customer side as well, than a forum. I think we used Insighted, and then before Insighted, we used something else. I can't remember. But people are just more comfortable in Slack than in a forum. It's easier to keep track of. It's easier to scan and read all the messages. So when I say nurturing it, though, when it first was created, it was exclusively having questions answered by CSMs, solution architects, support engineers. That kind of created a resource for people to be like, hey, I can go here, get my question answered, get value, etc. So people were then starting to funnel in. And then as people funneled in, that's when you start to see people answering each other's questions. And that's like behavior that you really want to reward. So, being like, hey, thanks, John, for answering Michael's question. Things along those lines, rewarding them. We also do fun events, so to speak. So like networking events where we'll do community meetups. I know we've done a few of these. We did one in London that I believe was like very successful. It was just rented out a restaurant for a day, like a small restaurant, had members from community come, and it was just like a space for people to talk about analytics, what they do, what other people do, etc. I think that really creates a sense of for lack of a better word, community within community. So things like those have been really successful, I think, for kind of getting such a large sized Slack community, which I think was the question that you were trying to get to.
Yeah, it's truly incredible to see how quickly it's grown just in a few years. And you have a big customer base, but to see how active it is and how many people are engaging and helping each other, which is really inspiring, because I think a lot of the newer communities, people are still, they're working on seeding it with enough people that can help each other without needing support engineers or CSMs to be chiming in on every thread. So I really like that. So I got a private question here to dive a little bit deeper into some of the metrics that you're looking at. You talked about kind of P90, first response time, follow-up time, resolution time. What have you seen with Slack? How has Slack kind of affected certain metrics? How has Athena helped contribute in any way, if any, to influencing some of those metrics like first response time? Can you touch a little bit upon that?
Yeah, so currently, thanks to Athena, we're able to tag tickets in Zendesk with a Slack tag. And that tag we then send to Mixpanel via the Zendesk webhook. And we're able to then use Mixpanel to kind of analyze Slack questions versus non-Slack questions. And what we've seen there is an almost 100-hour decrease in P90 first response time, which is kind of mind-blowing. It's significantly faster to both first response and resolution, but mainly first response, because that's what we at Mixpanel kind of emphasize our own support engineers on. That sharp decrease is, I think, the biggest kind of beneficiary of having Athena and using Slack support, because customers are getting their questions answered faster where they live. Now, we do other analysis on, for example, NPS or CSAT. And I think one learning for us at Mixpanel, and this is something that we have yet to solve for, is the way we currently send out CSAT surveys is via email. This makes sense when you're emailing a customer or you're doing a live chat in product that then disappears. But what we found is if you're having an interaction on Slack, customers don't want to go to email to fill out a CSAT survey. So I think our response rate on email tickets is around 15%. It's actually higher for live chat tickets. I don't know off the top of my head what the response rate is, but it's even higher than email tickets. However, for Athena tickets, the response rate is less than 2%.
Meaning like the CSAT is sent via email?
CSAT sent via email, and people are not responding because they are working in Slack, so they're not thinking of email. So I think that was something that, full disclosure, the Athena team tried to get us to use their built-in CSAT, and we wanted to continue using our own CSAT. I think that was one learning for us at Mixpanel, that if you are expecting people and you want people to fill out CSAT surveys, it has to happen where they live, where the interaction happened, for them to associate the interaction with that CSAT. Because the drop off of 15% to less than 2% is really drastic. It's already so hard to get people to fill out a CSAT survey, in my opinion. So you want to lower the barrier to entry of doing that. So I think that was like one learning that like the analytics showed us like right away. And that's something that we're going to work with the Athena team to port over potentially our CSAT for at least for Slack interactions to using Athena's built-in tool. There's a second part to your question that I kind of forgot. Can you refresh my memory?
Oh, just yeah. Let's see. I don't recall what the other part of my question was, but it was really just focused on what are the metrics? How has Slack and Athena influenced some of those key metrics for you? And then I think from there, how are teams using that data to inform any decisions that they want to make, anything that they want to change? How's that data used?
Yeah, so I think another metric that we're using that is really kind of it has not done it so far, but yet to inform our decision is ticket volume. So we realized that customers that have access to Slack support via Athena are creating more tickets prior to when they were given Slack support. Now, the question is, are they creating more tickets, but are the tickets easier to solve because they're being done via Slack? And the answer seems to be yes. It's really hard to have science to back that up. It's more about speaking to members of the team. But I think on average, I was looking, and if you are a customer with access to Slack support and you have Athena in your shared Slack channel, your average tickets per month went out from 5.5 to 6 point something. So almost a 1 ticket per month increase post being given access to Athena. That was something that we were able to do in Mixpanel, thanks to the tagging that Athena set up for us in the Zendesk workspace. So that was kind of like a revelation that we had to make. We haven't done any action on it. And to be honest, if customers are getting questions answered that were going unanswered, this is better. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that they're writing in more, especially because the resolution time for a Slack ticket is so much shorter because of the quicker turnaround versus email. But that was kind of like one change that we realized when implementing Athena. Now, as far as sentiment goes, both customer sentiment and account manager sentiment, I think what I've heard from account managers at Mixpanel is it's kind of a blessing for them. I have a lot of account managers actually DMing me on Slack, being like, can we add Athena to these channels, and sending me like a list of channels. I think for them, it's such a kind of relief to know that there's a support system for you to fall back on when a customer asks a question. Because I think it never feels good for a CSM or an account manager to have to be like, hey, I'm going to write an email for you. I'm going to CC you and forward it to support. I don't think account managers like to do that. I think it doesn't reflect well on them. So being able to, right away, just turn it into a ticket, have someone jump in real time on Slack from the team. And sometimes the account managers, they'll even do like a soft intro, be like, hey, I'm going to introduce Mike from our support team, and they'll be helping you. And then Mike will like join the thread and start replying right away. And it's super organic. We set up like a rules of engagement when we give customers access to Athena, so they know exactly how to kind of interact with the support engineers should they choose to join the channel, as well as like etiquette for posting questions, like 1 question per thread kind of situation. But yeah, that's kind of been the sentiment from the account team. Very much so positive. I think it's the shiny new thing that the account team at Mixpanel now has to try to give to all their customers. I have a lot of our account managers in EMEA and APAC messaging me, maybe even monthly, being like, when are we going to open up Slack support to these other regions? And that's like a decision that we're trying to figure out based on staffing currently. And then as far as customer sentiment goes, I found that I read every Slack ticket because we've been using it for about 3 or 4 months now. So it's still new enough where I'm very invested in all the tickets that are generated via Slack. So I read them myself. And I think even though we're not getting CSAT responses on them, there's been 80 of them, to be clear. Even though we're not getting CSAT responses on those 80 tickets, I think something that I've really noticed is how grateful the customers are. I see a lot of thank you messages, a lot of emojis sent, a lot of like just general gratefulness for us jumping in and meeting them where they live. So I think in that sense, it's been a great success. And I think, I mentioned how we've given Athena to some customers on a 1-year kind of trial period until we figure out exactly what our model is going to be like and eligibility is going to look like. I think the real kind of like opinions will come out 1 year from now when that 1-year trial period is running out, and we'll see how people react to like the value that they've received via Slack support. Because when I look at the numbers, once they get access to Athena, they don't write in emails as much anymore. Though I will say, in full disclosure, a lot of those accounts that were enterprise and did get access to Athena, it seems like most of their tickets were being generated by the account managers by like forwarding in tickets for them. So it seems like that's just like we've eliminated that forwarding in workflow. And for anyone who's worked with like complex Zendesk triggers, they're very finicky when trying to route account priority when it's being forwarded in by someone whose email is at mixpanel.com, because it keeps trying to think that you are part of the Mixpanel org and your ARR is 0. So you get no priority. So it's kind of eliminated that workflow for the account managers, which was very kind of error prone. So that's like one nice benefit that we've seen as well.
I love that. Yeah, the it's such a common thing where you either have to tell the customer, before Athena, hey, go write the email to support, which then you're pushing them to a platform that they prefer not to use. Or like you said, the account manager, the CSM needs to write it, and that creates all sorts of down funnel things on the account view, on the triggers, et cetera. Sid is very happy to hear that more folks are trying to pull Athena into more channels. So that's great news. And you touched on ticket volume. I remember at Branch when I was leading the entire go-to-market team, there was a period where I said, we got to get our ticket volume way down. I want like a zero ticket. Like if we can get to the point where we have no support tickets, that'd be ideal. It was such a backwards way of thinking, because I realized after that, when we started to close off channels and then reopen them back up, was actually you want tickets, because the alternative in most cases is not that person is forced to go use your documentation and figure it out. The alternative is that they suffer in silence, and that they end up not getting their issue resolved. And then you find out about it 9 months later when they churn, and then they say, well, we never got value out of the tool. So that was a big learning for me, that actually increased volume not only helps resolve their issues, and because they're empowered to actually get those resolved, but also built trust. It built the relationship, it built the rapport, because the more back and forth you have, the more of that rapport and relationship exists. So I think that's a really great insight that you had.
Yeah, oftentimes if you interact with the support team at Mixpanel, your product NPS is higher, because you have a better understanding of the product. You're not frustrated. I mean, I think suffering in silence was such a great way to describe it, because if you're blocked and you have no easy way to get unblocked, and someone telling you to send an email to an email alias is, I think, a pretty terrible like customer experience, to be honest. I think if somebody told me like, hey, could you send an email to support@mixpanel.com, when I asked the question to like my account manager, I would probably not write that email. I'd probably feel kind of miffed, to be honest. So I think kind of knowing that if they don't get the support they need, they're either going to suffer in silence, like you said, or drop off. They'll just stop using the product because they're blocked, and you haven't unblocked them. So I think, like I said, lowering the barrier for entry is really a game changer there.
I love that. And you talked about the long term. I think it'll be really interesting to see long term the retention, the expansion, the overall customer satisfaction with folks that have access like this in Slack to your teams, to the account management teams, versus folks that don't, and what that difference is, if any. I think that'll be a really interesting study. Okay, so just in the last 5 minutes, wanted to switch over to forward-looking future, where the world's going. AI is a big topic. Where do you see AI potentially adding value in your workflows and your team's workflows and customers' workflows? Maybe we can start there.
Yeah, I think there's a few, kind of ways that AI can kind of play a role here. We actually did in May an AI hackathon at the company, where it was 1 week. All the engineers and designers and product managers were broken up into teams of like 4 or 5 people of their choosing, and they would work on an AI project. And I was actually very surprised to see that a lot of these AI projects had some element of kind of support related to them. So one that I saw that was very cool was like a live chat, like AI bot, kind of, not like Drifter exactly, because it was actually interactive. But what it allowed you to do is be like, hey, Mixpanel bot, I'm having trouble applying some filters. I'm trying to remove X, Y, and Z data. And the AI bot would have its own cursor, and it would point, like hover over where you need to click to add a filter, to kind of like point out exactly like where you need to go. That was such a cool kind of like use of AI, where it's not just answering the question, it's teaching you how to fish. Because I think AI text bots are really great, don't get me wrong, but I think the next frontier is like, I'm asking AI, I want it to do something for me. So another example, not in the support realm, but it's just at Mixpanel, is Spark. So that's a new feature that we're launching at Mixpanel, where you can type in a spoken language question, and Mixpanel will generate reports answering that question for you, completely AI. All you do is just us, like, how's my MAU doing? And Mixpanel will create MAU, DAU, all these reports for you over time, looking at a month alone, etc. But other instances of where I can see AI helping support, I think, is documentation. I think there's a lot of different ways actually that AI can help documentation. I think there's, autoresponders are like things that suggest articles. These have existed in the past, but the current kind of rate of iteration of AI has opened this up to be so much better than what it's been like in, the past years, where you're asking a question to support, AI is reading the question, they're sending you articles that are relevant and/or answer the question directly. I think that's really awesome. Also, being able to, type a question in like spoken language and just be given like an article or a response that's based off of articles. I think that's like another like next frontier kind of. But yeah, I think autoresponders and like utilization of docs with AI is going to be like that next like big boom for like support.
That's going to be really interesting. And I know we're talking about or exploring the knowledge base AI, especially for Slack, where people maybe are asking questions that tend to be repetitive a lot of times, like maybe, how do I do X? Being able to deflect some of those tickets, being able to enable quick responses on those is really exciting. And then over time, I think one of the challenges with Slack that will be interesting to solve is there's a lot of content that maybe gets missed or buried pretty easily, and being able to use AI to summarize for teams. And we even do it for individual tickets. We can summarize those tickets, but being able to summarize the channel is going to be really interesting. So I think we're equally as excited to see where it comes. I love the UI piece of what you described there, being able to not just teach, but also show. That really reinforce. I think that's awesome. That's really cool. Awesome. So final plug. You're hiring some support engineers, L1 support engineers in the US and London?
US, London, and Barcelona.
Okay, awesome.
So every region except for Singapore, we're hiring, and we're really excited to be kicking off this hiring process.
And where can people get a hold of you if they want to send you some referrals?
So first of all, they can email me, Shayan@mixpanel.com. We also have the careers page. So folks are more than welcome to just go to mixpanel.com/jobs, and you'll see all the openings, including the support engineering ones, which are at the top, because support is the lifeblood of any good company. And at Mixpanel, we've had a long history tradition of support. We used to make every single employee, even our CEO Amir, work on support tickets when he first started. So legendary support is something that we live and breathe at Mixpanel. So it's definitely like something that the rest of the company really knows is the center of focus.
Love that. I love that. With that, we'll wrap it up. Shayan, really appreciate it. You guys have done a phenomenal job with your support team, your support organization and structure, and taking care of customers. So thank you for the time, the insights, and the takeaways today.
No, of course. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Wonderful. Appreciate it. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.